Bonjour à tous et bienvenue dans la Disteelerie, le premier, le seul et donc forcément le meilleur podcast dédié aux Steelers en français. Ça fait un petit peu plus de 10 ans maintenant que je suis Steelers France sur Twitter, qu'on s'amuse beaucoup. Merci d'ailleurs de me suivre, mais je me suis dit qu'après autant de temps, il fallait quand même que je vous propose quelque chose de différent, quelque chose de plus. Et donc nous y voilà avec ce podcast. Et je dois dire que j'ai été aussi inspiré par les copains de la commu NFL FR, notamment les Jets, les Dolphins, les Vikings, les Giants aussi, je crois, les Eagles, et j'en oublie, c'est sûr, mais qui ont tous un podcast depuis maintenant quelques années et qui sont très forts. D'ailleurs, si vous ne connaissez pas ces podcasts, je vous invite à aller les découvrir. Après celui-ci, quand même, terminez d'abord cet épisode et puis après, vous aurez le temps d'aller écouter les podcasts des copains. Alors, à quoi vous attendre avec ce podcast? Eh ben, je voulais aller un petit peu plus loin que simplement discuter des résultats de la semaine et de quel joueur a performé, quel joueur n'a pas performé, qui on devrait mettre sur le banc ou autre. C'est très bien, c'est intéressant, mais il y a beaucoup de gens qui le font au-delà de moi et donc j'ai envie d'aller un petit peu plus loin et peut-être de découvrir les gens qui font Pittsburgh, qui font la ville de Pittsburgh, qui font les Steelers, et essayer de les connaître un petit peu plus en détail. Et j'espère que ça sera intéressant pour vous. En tout cas, ça sera intéressant pour moi. Alors évidemment, ce que ça veut dire, c'est que la régularité, la fréquence de ce podcast risque d'être un petit peu aléatoire, un petit peu espacée, pas forcément toutes les semaines. Mais je pense que c'est nécessaire parce que j'ai vraiment envie de vous apporter des invités intéressants chaque semaine, ou en tout cas aussi souvent que possible. Et en tout cas, c'est le cas aujourd'hui. Je suis très content d'avoir une super invitée aujourd'hui. On y vient tout de suite et j'espère que ça va vous plaire. Alors voilà qui nous amène donc à l'épisode du jour. Les Steelers ont été très actifs cette saison, c'est assez inhabituel, mais très actifs en free agency. Et puis on a aussi la draft qui approche dans quelques jours, à une semaine maintenant de la draft quand j'enregistre ce podcast. Donc on a beaucoup de sujets à apporter, mais avant ça, on va partir à la rencontre donc de notre invité du jour, je vous en ai parlé, et on a beaucoup de chance aujourd'hui puisque c'est quelqu'un que vous connaissez, que vous avez vu forcément en bord de terrain tous les dimanches depuis quelques années si vous suivez bien les Steelers, et c'est Brooke Pryor d'ESPN, qui est dédié aux Steelers depuis 5 ans et qui nous a rejoint, qui nous a accordé un petit peu de temps aujourd'hui. On a beaucoup de chance. Alors évidemment, je voulais parler en anglais, hein, donc si l'anglais c'est un petit peu compliqué pour vous et que vous écoutez en audio, je vous encourage à aller voir la vidéo sur YouTube ou sur Spotify. Après ça, je mettrai des sous-titres en français pour que ça soit un petit peu plus pratique pour tout le monde. Alors, de quoi on a parlé avec Brooke? On a parlé de sa carrière, un petit peu de l'évolution du métier de journaliste sportif et évidemment des Steelers avec, comme je le disais, la free agency, la draft qui approche à grands pas. Je vous laisse écouter ça, on se retrouve après et on parlera ensuite entre nous un peu plus en détail free agency, draft. C'est parti, let's go. Brooke Pryor, hello. Thank you for joining me. It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to have you on the podcast. How are you doing?
I am great. I am fresh off of my mini off-season vacation, so I'm super relaxed and ready for the draft to start.
Ready to go. Excellent. Steelers have been super busy in the last few weeks with free agency, so we do have a lot to talk about free agency and, as you say, the draft. But before we do that, let's get to know you a little bit more.
Absolutely. I am not nearly as interesting as the Steelers signing, Russell Wilson and trading for Justin Fields. But I am going into my sixth season covering the Steelers. It's kind of crazy how
Wow.
time flies.
Wow. And I mean, that's exactly what I'd like to know is, how does that work for you? You're from North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. And prior to covering the Steelers, you covered the Chiefs for the Kansas City Star. And you're now with ESPN covering the Steelers. And what I'd like to know, what I would find interesting, and probably the listeners too, is how does that process work? Do you get a call one day from ESPN saying, hey, do you fancy covering a different team? Or is it like us mortals with normal jobs that you have to apply and do a cover letter and all this stuff? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's funny. I did actually just get a call out of the blue from ESPN, but it was a long time coming. Like you said, I am from North Carolina. I went to UNC. I'm wearing a UNC sweatshirt right now.
Very nice.
And yeah, I started out. I went to journalism school there. I worked for the student newspaper, the Daily Tar Heel, and I kind of worked my way up. I covered small college football, and then I went to cover the University of Oklahoma for the Oklahoman
Hmm.
out in Oklahoma City. And that was a job that I got an email about just through networking. But before that, I mean, I was sending out tons of cover letters, resumes. If there was a job posted in the middle of nowhere, Texas, I was applying for it. And
Wow.
I rarely got a call back. But, I got lucky through, meeting people at different conventions, and that got me started at the Oklahoman. And from there, it's kind of word of mouth. You meet people covering different events, different, conventions, different games, tournaments, media days, all of those things. And that led me to the Kansas City Star. And I was there for Patrick Mahomes' first MVP season in 2018. Kind of crazy to get in on the ground level and see him. I mean, in training camp, he was throwing so many interceptions his first
Really,
season,
was
and
he?
we were all kind of looking at each other. Yeah, it was funny. We were in St. Joe, Missouri, middle of nowhere. And I remember we would look at each other, and he would make these insane plays, these crazy throws. And we're like, I mean, that's great. And then he'd turn around and throw an interception, and we'd say, this is going to be a high risk, high reward thing. Turns out it's all high reward, and he's incredible.
Yeah.
I ended up interviewing him in a coat closet after he won
Wow.
the MVP, because
Okay.
that's one of those moments where you zoom out from the 20,000-foot view and you're like, I
Incredible.
can't believe I'm in a coat closet interviewing Patrick Mahomes, the NFL's MVP.
That's pretty cool.
And
That's pretty
uh,
cool.
yeah, yeah. And then it was later that year that I got a call from ESPN from a woman that I had met at a convention.
Okay.
And she said, hey, are you interested in covering the Steelers? And I said,
How does that
well,
feel?
it it was kind of crazy, because I didn't want to leave Kansas City. I didn't want to leave covering Patrick Mahomes, especially when you look and say, gosh, I am on the ground level of a dynasty. And
You felt
it
that
was
straight
going to
away.
take a lot to get me away from that. And yes, I very much felt like, they had just lost to Tom Brady in the AFC Championship game in that overtime.
Oh,
That was insane, but you knew that there was something special happening. Um, but it's really hard to pass up ESPN and the Pittsburgh Steelers.
yeah, of
And
course.
at the time, Ben Roethlisberger was the quarterback. He
Yeah.
was just coming off a crazy season, a really good season for him. And 2 weeks into my first year on the job is when he blew out his elbow,
That's the
and
Seahawks
it's
game.
been chaos ever since. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That was
I'm
my
sure we'll
second
get.
week on the job.
Wow. I'm sure we'll get to talk about the quarterback situation plenty later on. It's funny you bring up Pat Mahomes so early because that was actually my very first game in Pittsburgh is 2018 when he plays and sort of burst onto the scene. So I also have a slight connection with him, obviously nowhere near yours, but that's quite interesting. Did you have any connection with the Steelers before? Did you have any sort of preconceived ideas before you took on the job?
So growing up in North Carolina, football is not nearly as big here. At least where I grew up, it was all college basketball. So I didn't really have a football team, an NFL team. If anything, I
Okay.
followed the Panthers and I followed whoever drafted UNC guys. But being, at least a huge sports person and in sports, I knew about the Steelers. I knew the tradition. I knew, Mike Tomlin and Bill Cowher and, the Rooney family, and just how just the rich tradition of winning that this team has. And actually, my first ever NFL game was a Steelers game. Uh,
Okay.
I came up, I want to say it was 2015, I believe. It was either Mm, actually, I think it might have been 2014. Anyway, I came up to cover UNC Pitt football, and the Steelers
Okay.
were playing the Lions the next day. So I had a friend whose family was all from Pittsburgh. He came with me, and I went with him and his family to Steelers Lions. It poured down rain the whole time. The Steelers were in their
That's the
bumblebee
full
uniforms.
experience. Oh, wow. Great.
Yep,
Full
I didn't know
experience.
it then, but yeah, and I had a Primanti sandwich at halftime, so I really just
Perfect.
checked all the boxes.
Went all in.
Yeah,
Great.
it was, I wanted to cover a team that I knew had a strong fan base, and the Steelers definitely have that. They are always interesting, and people always care.
Right. What about the city of Pittsburgh? Did you know anything? Obviously, you've got a lovely family picture behind you. I guess whenever you take on a new job, you've got to move your whole life again. How did that feel, or did you have any preconceived ideas about Pittsburgh as a city?
Yeah, I had visited a couple times in college, but I didn't know much about it. I love bridges, which is I literally have a picture book for kids that is, the best bridges in the world or something like that,
Well, here
and
you go.
because I love them so much. So that's what I knew about Pittsburgh, that they had a ton of bridges. I actually have my dog sitting right beside me. He was less than thrilled to move to Pittsburgh at first, but then
Okay.
I showed him the backyard and he loved it. But he, both my dogs came with me, my husband, and we got adjusted to it. It was not easy. It is, the rain, it's a little dark at times, but
Yep.
I love living in a city that has such passionate fans that care about what I'm doing, in terms of like they want to know what I know. And I get in an Uber to go to the airport, and the guy recognizes my name, and he's like, I heard you on the fan, I heard you on local radio, or I saw you on TV. And the first question is like, well, what do you think the Steelers are going to do about the quarterbacks? Or for a long time it was Kenny Pickett, now it's Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. And I love being in a city that is just very passionate about their sports, and the Steelers are definitely that.
Do you feel that every day? I mean, that was my first experience in Pittsburgh in 2018 now, where I was amazed on day one. You could just see half the people pretty much wearing sports stuff, whether it's Steelers or Penguins or Pirates, but everyone at all times on a Wednesday afternoon. There's nothing going on that day, but they're all full Steelers gear. And that's pretty much not something we see that much in Europe.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because it is true. Like, one of my favorite things about traveling is seeing people in random cities across the world in Steelers gear, because they have
Yeah.
such a big, passionate fan base. And then when you're in the city of Pittsburgh, it's just very concentrated. Like the Strip District, there's all the shops that sell the bootleg Steelers stuff or Pirate stuff or Penguin stuff. And the city is so fun when all of their teams are winning. That hasn't happened a lot recently.
Yep.
It's the Steelers and the Penguins have been very similar in the way that they kind of transitioned from stars that were good for a long time, and now then they start to age and trying to have to figure out the succession plan, and realizing that it maybe wasn't as settled as they thought it would be, or as seamless as they thought it would be. And they're trying to scrap and claw to make the playoffs. But when those teams are good, or when they're in playoff contention or in the playoffs, there's a buzz in the city, and it's so cool. And that's what I'm not a fan of the Steelers. I have to be impartial because of my
Uh-huh.
job, but I root for the city, I root for the fans, and I root for good stories. And all of those things are better when the Steelers are winning.
Of course. And we've talked about the fans and the city. How about the media landscape? Because again, you move to a new place, you also have to navigate the media landscape, and especially with a new sort of a new company on your name as well. So how does that adjustment work, and how did it actually happen for you?
Yeah, it's really tough, because with the Steelers, with the people who cover the Steelers, a lot of them have been there since the 70s or 80s. They
Absolutely.
have seen this team through everything. And when you're me, who not from Pittsburgh, I am young, not even from Pennsylvania, not from the region, don't have a history with the team. A lot of times it feels like you're playing catch up, because
Uh-huh.
Jerry Dulac at the Post Gazette has been, around the team since he was born, covering the team since, the 70s, 80s. He knows everybody in the front office. He knows all the players that have been there, all the coaches. And you have to make up a lot of time, and you have to do your research, and also not be afraid to ask questions, even if it feels like it's a dumb question. You don't know what you don't know. And so sometimes it's as simple as saying, well, why is that? Or who is that? And, that's how you start to kind of chip away at it. But it can feel pretty daunting at first. I tried to read a
Mhm.
lot of books, follow a lot of people on Twitter, watch videos just to try to catch up on the history of the Steelers because I don't have that ingrained knowledge that so many people covering the team have.
Of course. What's the relationship with the other people covering the Steelers from the other outlets? Is there a little bit of competition happening and trying to get the best bit out of players and coaches, or do you help each other out?
It's a little bit of both. It's funny the way that I kind of describe it to people. Like, I don't see my coworkers in terms of like other people who work at ESPN. I see them, I think I saw my boss once last year because a lot of them are based in Bristol, Connecticut, or they cover all the other NFL teams. So I rarely see my coworkers. Instead, I spend most of my time with my competitors because I am personally incredibly competitive and I want to get the best story. I want to get the scoop. I want to break the news, but I also want to have at least a friendly relationship with the people I see on a daily basis. Otherwise, it's pretty miserable when you spend, 40, 60 hours a week with these people traveling on the road. So I have some good friends on the beat, Brian Batko and Mike DeFabo. Brian writes for the Post Gazette. Mike works for the Athletic, and that's who we have a group text. I have a couple girlfriends that are on the beat that work for TV stations, Jenna Harner and Emily John Greco, and we have a group text. And so you can kind of commiserate when things are frustrating, and talk about things going on, but there's always that part that you can't necessarily say everything because you don't want to give away your scoop. You don't want to give away
Of
your
course.
competitive advantage. And so that's what my husband, will hear me complain or try to bounce ideas off of him, or I call my editor, or I talk to my dogs because who are they going to tell? But yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic.
You mentioned your husband. Is he also a football fan, or is he completely an outsider from this?
He is a football fan. He works for Vox Media,
Okay.
working for their DraftKings website. So he does a lot of sports betting content. But yeah, he is a Panthers fan. It's been a really rough existence for him. And he also is a South Carolina football fan and a Braves baseball fan. So he watches it.
Wow.
But he also, he has to watch a lot of the football games for work, but he isn't as in the like day-to-day stuff as I am, but he hears all about it when I come home and tell him something that happened in the locker room or something that somebody said or something that happened at a press conference. And it's cool because he understands because he's also in sports media, so it's not, having to explain a totally foreign landscape to what's going on.
Probably makes it easier as well. You're both working on Sundays, I guess, so it's easier to adjust to each other.
Exactly. Yeah, we both worked the Super Bowl this year. I was doing the live blog for ESPN, and he was writing up uh, different injuries or big plays that were happening for the DraftKings website. So our Super Bowl party is we heat up pizza rolls and order wings and sit beside each other on our laptops watching the game. So I like our tradition, but it's not what most people are
Yeah,
doing.
it doesn't sound like much of a party, to be honest, but something else, something different.
Exactly.
Cool.
We have seltzer water and maybe a glass of wine.
Wow, don't go too crazy. Talking about your job, and we talked about the media landscape. One thing that's quite striking to me as well is how your job must have changed over the last, I don't know, even 5 years. Just social media, for example. I'm guessing when you studied journalism, you didn't spend half your time on Twitter and Facebook, and TikTok didn't exist back then. How does that affect you? How did your change? How did your job sort of evolve and change over the years?
Yeah, I made my first Twitter account, my only Twitter account when I was a freshman in college and I was sitting in the dorm's laundry facility. Like I think the first thing I tweeted was doing laundry at Hinton James, which was the name of our dorm, so bored, LOL. It was very much a fun thing at the time, and I'm lucky that that's at least when social media was getting off the ground when I was in college. So I got used to the idea of live tweeting and being in a 24/7 news cycle. But even now, I mean, I was in college in 2010, and even now, 10, 15 years later, it is even more 24/7 nonstop. During free agency, I mean, the Russell Wilson news broke at I think 11:45 p.m. and thankfully I was awake because it was during daylight savings time. So my internal clock, it felt like it was really 10:45. I was wide awake and able to handle the breaking news. But because of that, you have to have this like instant reaction. You have to constantly be on. And I tell people it's like being a doctor on call, except I'm not saving lives and I'm not doing anything remotely close to that important, but you kind of always have to be monitoring your phone. The only time that I put my phone on do not disturb is at night when I go to bed. And even then, I'm constantly checking it. But when I just went on vacation for 4 or 5 days, I didn't check Twitter. I turned off all my
Right.
notifications, and that was really relaxing. It's the second time I've ever done it, but the first time was just kind of white knuckling it, feeling like, "Oh my gosh, what if something happens and I'm not there and I have to, tweet about it, or, I have to write a story. There's going to be something that happens. I need to be involved." But it makes the being the social media makes the connections and the connectivity just so much more.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I like it. I like being able to do podcasts, do different kinds of media. The quick videos. Those are things that were just starting when I got into the industry.
Right.
Doing like the quick analysis on video or tweeting your thoughts, things that are more informal than just writing a story. So I like having different mediums to communicate with people through.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And I guess yeah, if you were studying at the time when all of that sort of came on board, you sort of got to grow with it as well. Saw the good sides of it, but there's probably also very negative sides, right? You're really exposed. Everybody can get to you. And as sad and crazy as it sounds to me, at least in 2024, is it still harder to be that exposed when you're a woman in this industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I've changed the way that I use Twitter over the years. When I got started, I would do fan Q&As and, you know, actively engage with followers a lot and, respond to all my DMs and things like that. But the longer I'm in it, the more that I kind of have to put up boundaries and guardrails because it can get so nasty. I don't see tweets unless, like, if somebody replies to me, if I don't follow them, I don't see the reply unless I go to my tweet and I
Right.
click on it and then I see the replies underneath. Like, I don't get the notification. Um, I my DMs are open because, I as a journalist, it feels irresponsible to have them closed because what if somebody has a tip? What if somebody has a story?
Right.
But I go through them pretty sparingly. And I don't get any notifications about my mentions unless I follow someone
Okay.
because the amount of people, you're right, because of that, just it's so easy for people to access you or take up, just get your attention. And I have to be really intentional and mindful of that because it is so easy to go down a rabbit hole of
Yeah.
wake up in the middle of the night. And I've been through this before when I've reported on things that people aren't happy with. I can search my name on Twitter and instantly find hundreds of tweets of people who hate me, from the way I look to what I'm saying to how I dress to my face. Like it ranges from personal critiques to professional critiques, and it can be a lot. So I definitely have to be careful about how I use Twitter and use Instagram and use all those things because it can send you just down a rabbit hole of depression, really.
I guess that's also something that you learn over the years, right? And I'm guessing all those mechanisms that you mentioned to a bit protect yourself, that's probably not something you had at the very beginning. And I'm assuming, like everyone else, you start somewhere, it's your first job, you want to know how you're doing. I'm guessing you had Googled your name at the time or put it in the search bar of Twitter. I'm guessing you just avoid this at all costs now.
Yes, yes, and I still have, I remember I set up Google alerts on my name maybe in college or right after. So I get an email, like a digest every morning if my name is mentioned somewhere. And sometimes it's great to have to kind of know what people are saying, or, what blogs are aggregating my work or where I'm being cited, those kind of things. But sometimes they pull results from message boards. And especially when I was
Right.
covering colleges, message boards are brutal. And it's one of those things where it's like, you know what, maybe it's better if I don't know what's being said. I'm going to protect my mental health by just, I'll I'll keep an eye on it, and if it's something really bad, I'll send it to my husband or send it to a friend to vet it out and let me know if there's anything that I
Right.
really need to be worried about.
Well, that's really interesting that you put it through a filter of other people first. I think that's a really, really clever idea. Cool. Uh, if we go back to something you mentioned at the very beginning of the podcast, Patrick Mahomes, and also prior to that, Baker Mayfield, you've covered some pretty interesting times in terms of quarterbacks. And as you said, then you get to the Steelers. It's the last couple of years of Big Ben, and now a bit of a funny situation. I must say, I was personally very surprised that both Russell Wilson and Justin Fields joined the Steelers this summer. I think not many other people expected that. Um, do you think the Steelers have like a long-term plan? It feels a bit blurry at the moment.
Blurry is a great word for it, because I do kind of feel like they are in this weird transition where I think they hope that Justin Fields will be the future, but they recognize that he's not a finished product right now, that there are still a lot of things that he needs to work on in terms of timing, his accuracy, being a better decision maker, being a more fluid decision maker. And I think their hope is that he will learn that from Russell Wilson, that they are kind of giving
Uh-huh.
him this tailor made, here is your mentor, here is a stable franchise, here's a stable head coach. Like, we're going to give you all the tools to be a franchise quarterback, things that he didn't get in Chicago, because Chicago as an organization is just kind of a mess. He was playing for a front office that didn't draft him, a head coach that didn't draft him. And I think it really just, things fell apart because he wasn't set up to succeed. And so Pittsburgh said, hey, you know what? We're going to set you up to succeed. Here are all these things. We're not going to have to give up a lot of draft capital to get you. We want you to be the future, but you're not the present. And the present, Russell Wilson, they're using as a bridge quarterback, because he is a veteran. I think that he's a veteran who's been to Pro Bowls, who's won a Super Bowl. I think they feel like, okay, he is steady. We don't need him. We don't need to let Russ cook. We need to let Russ follow the directions of the recipe. Here are all the ingredients. We don't need you to freelance. We don't need you just start doing crazy things. It's almost like they're asking him to bake instead of cook, because when you bake, you have to
Uh-huh.
follow all the measurements very precisely, or else the cake doesn't turn out right, the dough doesn't rise. When you cook, you can sprinkle a little bit of spices, measure with your eye, just kind of, freelance and do whatever you want. They're like, no, 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 no. We want you to eliminate the mistakes. We want you to play smart football. We want you to teach Justin Fields and get us through this year, maybe next year. And I think that that's kind of where they're at with it, but it is a risk, even though financially this year they're not committing much money at all to the
Exactly.
quarterback
Yeah.
position. I think that they still have to look at it and be smart about the contingency plans that they need to make in the future. That, okay, we're not going to go into this with blinders on, because I think that they kept the blinders on with Ben Roethlisberger too long. And that's how they ended up prolonging his career and not looking at, oh, wow, not having, we're heading toward needing a quarterback in a draft class that is a historically weak draft class for quarterbacks. And now they're in a position where they're being forced to pick Kenny Pickett, although nobody forced them to use their first round pick on that. And that was, hindsight's 2020, but I think that was a very risky move. Just knowing that, yes, he had a high floor, but a very low ceiling. And they also didn't give him the tools to succeed. And I think that they're trying to
Absolutely.
do better this time. But yeah, I think that they have to be smart about this and play Russell as long as he is not making mistakes, but still be positioning Justin Fields to take over when the time is right, give a chance to evaluate both of them, and then move forward from there, whether that's with Justin as the starter and, you lose Russ after this year. But I think that they have to find a way to evaluate both of them before they commit any more money to the quarterback situation.
That's a great point you made. Is hopefully transition from Russ to Fields when the time is right. The big question is, will the time ever be right? And if so, when? Russell Wilson is on a 1 year contract now. Do you think we can see another contract coming up, or are the Steelers going to use the whole season to evaluate the situation and only talk about the future with Russell Wilson towards the end of the season?
I think that they should wait until the end of the season. I don't think it would be smart on their part to commit a lot of money in the future on Russell Wilson to extend him before they really know what they have on the field in game situations. The Steelers don't negotiate contracts during the season, so it pretty much will either happen right before the season or not until the season is over when he would be getting ready to hit free agency. And they do have, a couple weeks between the end of the season and the start of free agency that they could get something done with him then if they wanted to. But I think that because he's an older quarterback, he was injured a couple years ago. He didn't have the best track record in Denver. He did rebound and play better in his last year, but still, I think that you want to get at least a couple games in, or at least, as much as you can into this season and in Arthur Smith's offense, because you've just hired this new offensive coordinator, before you start looking at a future with Russell Wilson. And Justin Fields has a fifth-year option decision that's due in
Very true.
May. This come just in a couple weeks. I think that if I'm the Steelers, I would not pick up that fifth-year option. It's a ton of money, and instead, I think you do something like what the Packers did with Jordan Love, where you give him an extension, but for less money than the fifth-year option, so that you can at least have him under club control, saying like, hey, we think that this will work, but we don't need to give you $20 million on just a we think. I think that that would be very unsteelers like to pick up that option and pay him before they really know what they're working with.
Yeah, unsteelers like is the word you've just used, which sort of brings me on to my next question nicely. I think we didn't expect all those moves at the QB position. How much of that do you think is Omar Khan and not the Kevin Colbert Steelers? And do you see that change also in other aspects of how the organization works?
I think that Omar Khan deserves a lot of credit for getting the deals done that the Steelers have done, for getting Justin Fields for essentially a sixth round pick. But I think a lot of it is Mike Tomlin's influence on a lot of these decisions. I think that with Omar Khan, Mike Tomlin has even more of an influence in the decision making than he did
Right.
with Kevin Colbert. It kind of felt like before that all three, Kevin Colbert, Mike Tomlin, and Art Rooney II, all three had kind of a third of the decision. Now it kind of feels like maybe Mike Tomlin has 40%, 45% of the decision, and then the other two split between Art Rooney and Omar Khan. I think that a lot of these decisions that were made in the quarterback room, especially, are Mike Tomlin saying, I am tired of getting 500 seasons and going to the playoffs and losing in the first round. Like, I think that he feels his own coaching mortality in terms of, yes, he
Mhm.
does have some job security in terms of the Steelers and Art Rooney are working on an extension with him right now. Art Rooney is still very happy with his job. He has a ton of job security, but he isn't satisfied with just being 500. I think that he wants to solidify his own legacy in terms of playoff success. And more than anything, he wants to win for his older players. He wants to get Cam Hayward to the Super Bowl. He wants to get TJ Watt to the Super Bowl. He wants to get Minka Fitzpatrick to the Super Bowl. And I think he feels like, I have this championship level defense. Like, when these guys are healthy, they can play with anybody. They can beat anybody. They can shut down these passing attacks. They can shut down the ground game. But offensively, we don't have an identity. Offensively, we're kind of floundering and just doing the bare minimum, just doing enough. And I think he looked at Russell Wilson and said, this is a guy who has a drive to be great. He has been great. He wants to get back to that level. Let's go out and get him and just see if it works. You know, it kind of feels like they're throwing stuff against the wall right now offensively.
Yeah.
A lot of it driven by Mike Tomlin and driven by his desire to win. But I do think that Omar Khan deserves credit for, you know, going out and making Mike Tomlin's vision happen and going out and saying, all right, Mike, you want some quarterbacks? I'll get you some quarterbacks. Like, here's your wish list. Let's see what we can make fit in our roster. And he's checking off those boxes really, really well.
It did feel like there was a noticeable change of tone, I would say, from Mike Tomlin. The last 3, 4 weeks of the season, at least that's the perception that I had, thousands of miles away from Pittsburgh. But did that also feel the same in, like, the press conferences?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there was definitely a shift in his tone the last couple games of the regular season. And then definitely in his season ending press conference, he almost got emotional talking about guys like Cam Hayward and how much he wants to win for them. And particularly, he brought up Marquise Pouncey, the center, who I don't believe Pouncey won a Super Bowl. And that's something that like really bothered him. Like he feels like Pouncey deserved more, and that's why, I mean, the NFLPA did its survey of, everything from facilities to
Yeah.
ownership to coaches. And Mike Tomlin got an A. That's because the players have such a belief in buying in Mike Tomlin because he reciprocates that. And he is someone that is no nonsense, but, coaches them up, loves them up, is transparent with them, and pushes them to be great. And I think that he really feels that. I think there is a weight to it that he feels like he is letting these players down by not taking them farther, by not getting them farther in the playoffs. And so I think he kind of feels like time's running out for some of these guys, and that's why he's making this push. And I think that's what you're hearing.
And talking about Mike Tomlin and maybe the attraction that he has and how he can help bring players in, it really feels like he had a big impact on the surprise move of the last few weeks. Patrick Queen signing with the Steelers. Did you see that one coming?
I did not see that one coming. That is also a very unsteelers like move to go out and get, I mean, one of the best and most expensive free agents on the market at that position. That is, the Steelers do not typically spend that money. And that's again where I give Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin and Art Rooney II credit for breaking tradition and saying, you know what, we're not just going to sign these guys from the bargain bin. We're going to go out. We see a weakness in this team. This is the person that we're going to use to plug that hole. We're going to get the best thing instead of just some duct tape and hope that it holds. I think that Patrick Queen is everything that Mike Tomlin looks for in a linebacker. He, I think, will be the closest thing they've had to a Ryan Shazier in terms of just a well-rounded inside linebacker that can play the run, that can drop back in coverage. I think they hoped that Cole Holcomb would be that, and he was getting close to that, and then he had this catastrophic knee injury that is still taking time to come back from. And so signing Patrick Queen gives them, I think, way more security at that position, takes some pressure off Cole Holcomb, and I think it's a great pairing with Landon Roberts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have a bit of a reputation as being a bit of a black cat for the Steelers, and certainly holds true for Paul Cole Holcomb. I was in the stadium for that game, so yeah, my bad, Cole. If you're listening, it's probably my fault anyway. Uh, so that the Steelers have plugged a few holes in the roster with the quarterback, the inside linebacker. The other way, I guess, to plug a few holes is the draft coming up next week. Uh, I would say offensive tackle, center, cornerback, wide receiver. That's probably the top needs. Am I missing anything? Do you see anything else? And also, out of those, where do you think they go in the first round?
Yeah, I think, did you say cornerback is one of the ones?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the other one that I would think they would target. A lot of their visitors that they've had into the facility for their top 30 draft visits have been center, offensive tackle,
Hmm.
corner. I think they've had some wide receivers also. And I think that's exactly where they're going to go. I think that this is a very deep draft class at wide receiver. So I don't think they have to reach for one in the first. And they've done so well historically drafting
Yes.
receivers second round and later. And so I think that they can wait on that, but I think they need to address offensive tackle and center from the jump. I think center is the most pressing thing because they released Mason Cole and then didn't sign anyone. And yes, they have Nate Herbig, but I don't think you want to go into the season with Nate Herbig being your center. I think he's more of a position flexible guy instead of a dedicated center. So I think they'll look at that. I think they want a right tackle to pair with Broderick Jones so they can move Broderick to the left. As Dan Moore has said, he prefers playing on the left. Obviously, if they tell him, well, you're going to have to play right, then I'm sure he will adjust. But I think they'd like a dedicated right tackle. And then they need someone to play opposite of Joey Porter Jr. in the secondary. Patrick Peterson, it was clear he had lost a step. That's why he got released. He was good as a mentor for Joey and good as a guy that was also position flexible, that played safety, that could play in the slot. But I think that they need another lockdown corner to be opposite of Joey Porter Jr. So I think they're in a position this year where their draft needs are pretty clear, that they have plugged a lot of holes, but they still have a couple more things to do to really make this a well-rounded roster.
On the cornerback side of things, Dante Jackson joined in the Deontay Johnson trade. Where do you think he fits on the roster? Is that a starting cornerback in the eyes of the coaching staff? Is it a maybe a third option that could help in a couple of positions?
I think I've talked with a couple coaches, and they've said that he's a guy that I think could be a starter, that he's really flown under the radar. Um, as far as, fans go, he's not someone that fans know the name, that they see Dante Jackson. They're like, oh, yeah, that's a great corner. But they say that his tape shows that he can be a good, valuable piece. But I think that maybe he starts and they draft a rookie that ends up taking his spot. I think that he's a really good depth piece and a good veteran to have in that room, because it is really young, especially have to remember they also have Corey Trice, who tore his ACL in training camp coming back. He has a very similar body type to Joey Porter Jr., and I liked what I saw from him in training camp before he got hurt. So I think that the secondary as a whole, but specifically corner, has just a lot of question marks, like their bodies, but they're not necessarily bodies that I think you can for sure say, yes, I'm going to put him first string on the depth chart. He's a lock for that position. I think that there's still a lot of movement that will happen between now and the start of the season.
Feels a bit like they're trying to accumulate a few maybes in the secondary and see if one of them pans out.
That's exactly right. Yes, they have a lot of maybes and hoping that they can move one to a firm yes.
And on the opposite side, opposite the corners, we mentioned the wide receivers briefly. Are the Steelers ready to make George Pickens the first wide receiver on the roster?
I think so. I mean, talent wise, yes, he's absolutely a wide receiver one, but there are a lot of question marks in terms of just his consistency, um, in terms of his attitude, in terms of his coachability. I mean, he has all the talent in the world. But we saw last year there were times when he got frustrated and he let it show. And there are too many situations, I think, right now that he had in the last year where he got very emotional. Other teams saw that as a weakness and, they chirped at him. They did things to get under his skin. That's something that you can't have if you're the number one wide receiver. They have to be able to depend on him. And right now, I mean, I think you saw he had the game where he didn't block for Jalen Warren. Really
Yes.
disappointing. That becomes a huge flashpoint, a huge just like piece of controversy that really ripped through, Steelers media, the fans, the locker room, all of those things. I know that Mike Tomlin talked with him about it. And then the next week or 2 weeks later, he comes out and has a crazy good game and really finished the season on a high note when Mason Rudolph was his quarterback. And so you could see, like, if he can just get going, then yes, he's absolutely should be a wide receiver one. I think that their biggest question mark right now is wide receiver two. Right now it's Van Jefferson, but I don't think that that's who they want to go into the season with. I think maybe he's a wide receiver 3, and then you have Calvin Austin at the 4. I think that they really need a steady wide receiver 2. That has to be a top priority in the draft.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I think, there's at least one wide receiver that should come based on the past experiences and how well they've drafted them. I think probably day 2, I would guess, is when we see one join the Steelers. Uh, One thing that might help George Pickens is a new offensive coordinator potentially. Arthur Smith was signed just shortly after the end of the season. We've already seen his influence on the roster building with a couple of his former players, including Cordell Patterson joining. Um, how much of an impact and how much input will he have in the draft decisions? How does it normally work with coordinators within the Steelers?
I think that he'll have a good amount of influence on it because they want to give him the tools to succeed and have a roster with players that can kind of fit his schemes. There's going to be a lot of play action. I think we'll see the deep ball, a, not a huge amount, but I think that this is going to be a team that they try to build on a run first identity and then let the rest of the offense flow out from there. And so I think that he will have somewhat of a say. I mean, they're not going to draft someone that he looks at and says, "Oh my gosh, I can't work with that guy. He does not fit."
Mhm.
I think that they want and they need somebody that has top end speed because I think that that's a wide receiver that they don't really have
Yeah,
in their arsenal of wide receivers. I think that they'll take his input on that for sure. But I mean, especially when you look at the free agent signings, they're definitely taking into consideration what he thinks about these guys because they all have a track record of working with him in Tennessee or Atlanta. And so, yeah, I think that he is going to have a good amount of influence. I was a little bit surprised in the hiring. I thought that they might go from somebody from the Shanahan tree or the Kubiak
Mhm.
tree, but I
Yeah,
think that Arthur Smith can be a really innovative offensive mind. Didn't work out as a head coach in Atlanta, but when he was in Tennessee, he had a really efficient offense. He kind of minimized Ryan Tannehill and let Derrick Henry do the bulk of the work and then let Tannehill build off of Henry. And I think that because the Steelers have a similar um, combination with Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, that they can find kind of a similar chemistry between those two guys and Russell Wilson, that some of those similar principles and concepts can work with the Pittsburgh offense.
I had probably similar hopes and expectations to you in terms of the hire, the offensive coordinator. I was also hoping for someone maybe a bit younger, maybe with a more modern view of an NFL offense. But we have to remember and manage our expectations. It is the Steelers. Modernizing is slow, takes time. So we'll get there one day. But let's see what Arthur Smith brings on. And you mentioned play actions. That'd be a new thing to see at Acrisure Stadium. We haven't seen much of that in the last couple of years.
Right, which is wildly frustrating when Kenny Pickett was so much better in the play action.
Yes.
When you look at his stats, when they used play action, he was a different quarterback, and yet it felt like Matt Canada refused to go to it. And that's why, I mean, I was a little bit surprised. Actually, I wasn't a little bit surprised. I was shocked by the Kenny Pickett trade. But especially because I felt like he really would have worked in an Arthur Smith
Mhm.
system. I thought that that was a good hire in terms of bringing out what Kenny Pickett does best. But for Kenny Pickett, what he thought was best was to get a fresh start in Philly, and so the Steelers said okay, and they shipped him out. And now Arthur Smith will work with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. And I've been told that Arthur Smith really does like Justin Fields' skill set.
Right.
He had a lot of high praise for him before the Falcons played the Bears. So I'm interested to see how he kind of molds those two guys to fit in that system.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting, and hopefully we also get a bit of help on the offensive line. As you said, there's a couple of holes on there. Uh, Going back to the draft then, and how we can plug those holes. I think Omar Khan has showed last year that he's maybe a bit more, if not a lot more, willing to trade than Kevin Colbert used to be. Do you think we can see another trade this year? And would it be going up, going down? Do you think all options are on the table? Maybe.
I think all options are on the table. You're absolutely right. He is much more aggressive than Kevin Colbert in terms of the draft day trades. To me, it would make sense to trade back and get some more assets because I don't think that the centers are going to go off the board super early, especially it is a deep class at center. You could get a guy like Barton from Duke or
Yeah.
Frazier Price. I can't. The West Virginia center has like 3 first names, but they getting somebody like him, I think that they could afford to drop back a couple spots and acquire some more picks and build out more through the draft. That's something that I think Omar Khan, he likes to wheel and deal. The phones are going to be ringing. And, as a media person, I watch the draft with the rest of the media members in the Steelers team facility. And, you kind of feel like in past years when it was Kevin Colbert, you're paying attention to the draft, obviously, who's
Mhm.
going off the board, but you can kind of breathe easy and, know, okay, all right, well, they're picking 2021, so I can just kind of hang out and, just relax until we get maybe to like pick 17, then I need to, sit up straighter, start paying attention. But with Omar Khan, you never know what's going to happen, so you have to be locked in the whole time because he could, flip a pick or trade back, trade up. You never know because he's, the con artist. He just, I think, has a lot of fun wheeling and dealing during the draft.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of it. It's a lot more fun, at least for us fans, to watch the draft now than it used to be. It's a weird time of the day for us, or time of the night, really, especially the first round, especially when you pick around pick 20. And I used to go to sleep thinking nothing's going to happen until I pick anyway. And last year was a slightly different experience. You had to be up, you had to stay up to see all the potential changes.
Yeah, I did not expect them to trade up and to do a deal with the Patriots
With
to
the Patriots, yeah.
basically keep the Jets from getting Broderick Jones. And if you had told me that the Steelers and Patriots were going to work together, I would not have believed that. But there have been a lot of things the Steelers have done recently that I would not have believed. And you're right, that it's what makes it fun. I have enjoyed this job more and covering this team more the more unpredictable they are, even if it means late nights and early mornings and having to talk to more people to figure out exactly what happened. I think that that's so much fun.
Hi, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. It was a pleasure. It was a bit longer than I promised, but I've enjoyed every minute of it. I hope it was okay for you too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Voilà, alors un immense merci à Brooke Pryor qui nous a parlé bien plus longtemps que prévu. J'ai rien coupé, je voulais surtout pas vous priver de quoi que ce soit. Alors on a pas mal parlé free agency avec Brooke. Donc, ce que je vous propose, c'est d'oublier un petit peu le passé, la free agency, et de se tourner tout de suite vers le futur. Et le futur immédiat, c'est la draft qui arrive à 4 jours. On est à 4 jours de la draft au moment où je publie ce podcast. Donc ça arrive à grands pas. Les Steelers ont 7 choix dans cette draft. Et bon, c'est le cas en tout cas avant des trades potentiels. Omar Khan en a parlé, c'est une possibilité. Les choix actuels sont les suivants: un choix de premier tour, un choix de deuxième tour, 2 choix au troisième tour. Donc ça fait 3 choix sur la deuxième journée, ce qui est assez intéressant. Puis ensuite un choix au quatrième tour et 2 autres au sixième tour pour terminer. Donc rien au cinquième et rien au septième tour. Alors il y a plusieurs besoins, on en a parlé un petit peu avec Brooke également. Offensive tackle, center, cornerback, wide receiver, sans doute les postes les plus importants où il y a des trous, surtout depuis le trade de Deontay Johnson en ce qui concerne les wide receivers. Alors si on regarde les visites officielles de prospects à Pittsburgh, on le sait, les Steelers ont tendance à choisir au premier tour en tout cas des joueurs qu'ils ont rencontrés pendant le process de pré-draft. Et bien en regardant ces 30 visites officielles, hein, toutes les franchises ont droit à 30 visites officielles. Il y a 2 postes qui se détachent un petit peu côté des Steelers, c'est offensive tackle et corner. Donc sur ces 30 visites, ils ont reçu 7 tackles et 7 corners. Alors je dois admettre qu'il y a aussi 7 receveurs qui sont venus rendre visite aux Steelers. Mais si on regarde un petit peu leur profil, c'est peut-être plutôt des joueurs qui devraient partir au deuxième ou au troisième jour. Donc du deuxième tour au septième tour. Alors commençons par les tackles. Les Steelers ont reçu au moins 3 prospects à ce poste-là qui devraient partir quasiment à coup sûr au premier tour, dont en particulier le tackle de Georgia, Amarius Mims, qui revient très souvent, par exemple, dans les mock drafts. Donc je pense que c'est peut-être le joueur le plus attendu à Pittsburgh selon les spécialistes et les gens qui font des mock drafts. Et c'est vrai qu'il a le profil. Il est jeune, il a tout juste 21 ans, il fait 2 mètres, il est hyper athlétique. Et puis il vient de Georgia où les Steelers ont beaucoup recruté récemment, notamment, Broderick Jones la saison dernière. Donc c'est vrai qu'il a tous les traits d'un bon choix de premier tour pour les Steelers. Il y a aussi un petit point d'interrogation, notamment, sa blessure à la cheville en 2023. De mon côté, je suis assez persuadé que les Steelers, vont choisir au premier tour un tackle, potentiellement Mims, c'est vrai qu'il a le profil. Après de mon côté, le petit point noir, ça serait qu'en choisissant un tackle, les Steelers avec le 20e choix choisiraient peut-être le 5e, le 6e, le 7e meilleur tackle, de la draft. Alors que si on pensait en priorité à un autre poste, par exemple le poste de center, et bien là, il y aurait une possibilité d'aller chercher le top prospect ou en tout cas un top 2, avec par exemple Graham Barton de Duke ou un Jackson Powers Johnson d'Oregon. Les 2 joueurs ont d'ailleurs été reçus aussi par les Steelers, donc c'est aussi une possibilité, mais je crois que les Steelers ont reçu 3 ou 4 centers maximum pendant le process, donc ils ont gardé les 2 meilleurs gars, je pense. Si un de ces 2 là venait à être disponible, c'est une vraie option, mais je maintiens que je dirais peut-être tackle au premier tour. Chez les corners, les Steelers ont rencontré 4 joueurs qui sont projetés au premier tour, donc c'est quand même, un poste qui target, qui vise, c'est certain. Parmi les 4 joueurs qui sont projetés au premier tour, il y en a 2 qu'ils ont rencontrés en visite officielle à Pittsburgh et 2 autres en dîner à leur pro day, qu'ils avaient fait aussi avec, Broderick Jones l'année dernière, donc ça peut être aussi une possibilité. Donc parmi ces 4 joueurs, je pense qu'il y a 2 noms qui ressortent un petit peu plus, qui devraient être disponibles peut-être autour du 20e choix, des Steelers. Peut-être que les 2 autres partiraient avant. C'est Cooper DeJean d'Iowa et Kool-Aid McKinstry d'Alabama. Meilleur nom de la draft d'ailleurs entre vous et moi. Les 2 pourraient être disponibles et on sait que les Steelers ont besoin d'aide à ce poste-là. Patrick Peterson, Levi Wallace sont partis tous les 2 en free agency. Ils n'ont pas forcément donné satisfaction pendant leur passage à Pittsburgh. D'un côté, on a Joey Porter Jr. qui a l'air relativement bien installé et pour l'instant, à l'opposé, on a Dante Jackson qui est arrivé de Carolina dans le trade avec Deontay Johnson, qui est potentiellement le 2e corner. Après, on en parlait avec Brooke, hein, c'est pas forcément une situation idéale pour les Steelers et du coup, je pense qu'un jeune corner talentueux, pourrait être le bienvenu et qui pourrait devenir titulaire en cours de saison. On commencerait avec Jackson et puis une fois que la personne est disponible, oui et en tout cas au niveau, prendre un poste de titulaire. Encore une fois, très semblable à ce qui a été fait avec Joey Porter Jr. la saison dernière, qui a mis, je crois 7 ou 8 matchs avant d'être titulaire à plein temps. Donc je pense qu'un scénario similaire pourrait être possible si les Steelers venaient à choisir un corner au premier tour. Alors je vais me lancer. Comme on disait un petit peu avec Brooke, c'était assez facile de prédire le choix des Steelers au premier tour. Pendant que Kevin Colbert était là, c'était assez prévisible. Il y avait, une façon de faire, et en général, il n'y avait pas forcément de surprise, hein, que ça soit Najee Harris ou Kenny Pickett. C'était des joueurs qui étaient très attendus du côté des Steelers, et c'est un petit peu plus difficile de deviner. En tout cas, c'est plus imprévisible avec Omar Khan. Au-delà de ça, il y a la possibilité d'un trade, hein, qui pourrait venir chambouler tout ça. D'ailleurs, je pense que si on parle d'un trade cette année pour les Steelers au premier tour, je vois plus un trade back, donc reculer au premier tour, plutôt qu'un trade up pour monter. Je pense qu'il y a suffisamment de prospects disponibles, encore une fois, sur la ligne offensive ou les corners, que les Steelers pourraient éventuellement reculer de quelques pics au premier tour pour aller chercher un choix supplémentaire, peut-être au 3e, 4e tour. Comme je disais, on n'a pas de choix au 5e ou au 7e tour actuellement. Et je pense qu'un pic supplémentaire, jour 2, début de jour 3, serait intéressant. Et puis, il ne faut pas oublier quelque chose d'autre qui pourrait complètement chambouler ce qu'on prévoit actuellement. C'est la fameuse rumeur Brandon Ayuk, le receveur des 49ers, que les Steelers semblent vraiment viser pour un trade. Alors pour l'instant, du côté de San Francisco, ça n'a pas donné suite, mais qui sait, dans les 4 jours qui arrivent ou même en pleine draft, c'est pas impossible. Et évidemment, ça viendrait chambouler un petit peu tous les choix qu'on a actuellement. Mais partons du principe que rien ne change. On a encore ces 7 choix, donc du premier au 6e tour. Qu'est-ce que je pense qui va se passer? Et on pourra tous rire ensemble quand la draft sera passée et je me serai planté méchamment. Mais bon, commençons. Premier tour, sans surprise. Je vais dire tackle, hein, c'est pas une surprise après ce que je viens de vous dire. Donc je dirais tackle et puis potentiellement Amarius Mims. Alors attention, au choix 18, il y a Cincinnati qui choisit, qui a beaucoup d'offensive tackle aussi moqués chez eux et donc qui pourrait venir et prendre Amarius Mims. C'est d'ailleurs ce qui s'est passé dans la mock draft qu'on a fait entre comptes de franchise, comptes français de franchise ces dernières semaines. Les Bengals ont pris Amarius Mims au 18 et puis je suis allé chercher JC Latham d'Alabama, que les Steelers n'ont pas rencontré, donc peut-être un petit peu moins probable, mais c'est le poste que je pense que les Steelers vont viser. C'est un poste où on a eu beaucoup de difficultés l'année dernière, la saison d'avant, notamment à gauche avec Dan Moore, et je pense que c'était un peu la plus grosse faiblesse des Steelers depuis 2 ans, et donc je pense que s'il y a une opportunité de régler ce problème, les Steelers vont le faire. Deuxième tour, je pense qu'au deuxième tour, les Steelers vont rester sur la ligne offensive. Il y a notamment, Zach Frazier de West Virginia qui est, un bon center, probablement le troisième meilleur de la draft et qui devrait partir au deuxième tour. Donc je pense que c'est une vraie option, et puis on peut toujours espérer, en tout cas les Steelers peuvent toujours espérer, qu'on revoie un scénario comme en 2021. En 2021, Creed Humphrey, le center qui est maintenant, aux Chiefs, était tombé. Il était prévu de partir au premier tour. Finalement, il a glissé jusqu'au deuxième tour, et les Chiefs l'avaient choisi au choix 63. Et aujourd'hui, c'est un des meilleurs centers de la ligue. Et je pense que si un scénario un petit peu semblable venait à se répéter, si par exemple Jackson Powers Johnson pouvait tomber au deuxième tour, c'est pas impossible que les Steelers aillent le chercher, quitte à monter un trade de quelques choix pour aller le chercher. Il y a quelques mock drafts que j'ai vu passer où Jackson Powers Johnson était effectivement un choix de deuxième tour. Pas forcément ce qu'il y a de plus probable à mon avis, mais pas non plus complètement inenvisageable. Troisième tour, les Steelers ont 2 choix au troisième tour. Et on va enfin, je pense, à mon sens, oublier la ligne offensive. Et avec ces 2 choix-là, dans un ordre ou dans l'autre, je dirais que on va chercher notre corner et on va chercher un receveur. Et bon, peu importe de l'ordre, comme je dis, je vais pas donner de nom parce que, arrivé au troisième tour, c'est vraiment la loterie. Mais je vois bien ces 2 postes-là visés. On sait que les Steelers ont une forte tendance à choisir un receveur au deuxième tour et puis au deuxième jour, pardon, 2e ou troisième tour, avec plutôt beaucoup de succès ces dernières années, et je pense que cette saison, on va retrouver la même chose. Troisième tour, je vois très bien un receveur arriver à Pittsburgh. Quatrième tour, et là, ça devient vraiment compliqué, hein, de choisir les postes. Heu, c'est un petit peu la loterie en fonction de comment la draft tombe, des opportunités qui sont disponibles. À partir du quatrième tour, donc du troisième jour, on ne parle pas forcément de joueurs qui sont destinés à devenir titulaires, dès la première année, et donc il y a un petit peu plus de flexibilité. Ils ne sont pas vraiment là pour boucher un besoin sur le roster, mais plutôt pour apporter de la profondeur, et à ce niveau-là, vraiment les franchises tentent un coup. En ce qui concerne les Steelers, je pense qu'au quatrième tour, on va se diriger vers la défense, une fois de plus, soit un defensive tackle, soit un edge, donc un pass rusher. Les Steelers ont tendance à prendre un pass rusher un petit peu tous les ans. C'était Herbig la saison dernière. Je pense qu'on va répéter l'expérience. On n'a pas encore eu 4 pass rushers vraiment établis avec les 2 titulaires et 2 backups, et je pense qu'on peut encore voir ça. Cela dit cela dit, je pense que ça va attendre, et je pense qu'au quatrième tour, si je vais me lancer, je vais dire defensive tackle. Il y a besoin de profondeur. On sait que depuis quelques années, on a un petit peu de difficultés avec ce poste au niveau de la profondeur. Beaucoup de blessures. Il ne faut pas oublier que Cam Heyward aussi arrive peut-être vers la fin de sa carrière, et donc il faut commencer à penser à la succession. Tous les joueurs qui ont été draftés depuis quelques années, pas forcément donné satisfaction, donc je pense que les Steelers vont encore continuer. Et voilà qui nous amène donc au sixième tour, et c'est peut-être là qu'on va aller chercher un edge avec le premier choix de ce sixième tour. Encore une fois, c'est très fréquent, je pense qu'ils vont le faire. Et puis au tout dernier choix, donc le deuxième choix des Steelers au sixième tour, là, c'est vraiment tout est ouvert, tout est possible. C'est le coup de poker, et donc je pense qu'il y a pas mal d'opportunités, pas mal de possibilités, y compris d'ailleurs quarterback, hein. Les Steelers ont 3 QB sur le roster maintenant. En général, ils en emmènent 4 au training camp, donc ça pourrait être un free agent. Ça pourrait aussi être quelqu'un qui est drafté. Ils l'ont fait, il y a 2 ans avec Chris Oladokun, qui avait été drafté au 7e tour, qui n'avait pas pu vraiment, montrer de quoi il était capable et qui était parti en fin de saison, pardon, en fin de training camp chez les Chiefs. Il a d'ailleurs gagné 2 Super Bowls, hein, sans vraiment jouer, mais c'était peut-être le bon choix pour lui. Alors quarterback, c'est possible, d'autant que ce rookie pourrait aussi challenger Kyle Allen, hein, qui est le 3e QB actuellement, mais pourquoi pas, ou effectivement éventuellement être le 4e QB et finir sur la practice squad. On pourrait aussi voir un joueur de ligne offensive une fois de plus, C'est pas quelque chose que les Steelers ont peur de faire, hein, d'aller chercher 2 joueurs au même poste pendant une draft, en espérant qu'au moins l'un des 2 se développe et puisse faire le roster. Je pense que c'est pas impossible, que ça soit à l'intérieur, ou au poste de tackle. Pour l'instant, les backups, c'est Nate Herbig pour le poste de center et de garde, et Spencer Anderson et Dan Moore. A priori, hein, si on recrute un un tackle un peu plus tôt dans la draft, qui seraient les backups à ces postes-là. Donc il y a des options, bien sûr, mais il y a aucune vraie sécurité. Donc je pense qu'encore une fois, aller chercher un jeune joueur qui éventuellement pourrait se développer, c'est pas impossible. Et puis un dernier poste qui est vraiment, possible, avec ce dernier choix, je pense que c'est le poste de tight end. Il y a plusieurs les éléments pour ça. D'une part, les Steelers ont beaucoup de mal à trouver de la production avec un deuxième tight end depuis des années. Pat Freiermuth, pardon, est là bien installé au 1er poste de tight end. Derrière, c'est un peu plus compliqué. Darnell Washington, a apporté beaucoup de choses dans le jeu de course en fin de saison dernière, mais en termes de production à la passe, à la réception, c'était quasiment rien du tout. Et puis une deuxième chose qui est importante, c'est que Arthur Smith, le nouveau coordinateur offensif, a tendance à utiliser des fullbacks dans sa formation, dans son système. Les Steelers n'ont pas de fullback sur le roster actuellement, mais il y a des rumeurs comme quoi Connor Hayward, qui était d'ailleurs running back au college, pourrait, heu, pourrait changer de poste et devenir plutôt un fullback plutôt qu'un tight end, ce qui ouvrirait la porte donc à un potentiel deuxième ou troisième tight end qui pourrait venir renforcer, ce secteur. Peut-être plus un profil de receveur, de grand receveur, comme on peut le voir beaucoup dans d'autres équipes, qu'un profil de bloqueur comme les Darnell Washington. Et donc si je devais me lancer avec ce dernier choix, je pense que je dirais tight end. Voilà, sans aucune certitude évidemment, tout est possible. Pourquoi pas même fullback? Mais je vais dire tight end et puis, encore une fois, si je me suis planté, ce qui est fort probable, on pourra en rire ensemble pendant le prochain épisode. Donc je récapitule, mes prédictions. Premier choix, offensive tackle, deuxième tour center, troisième corner et receveur, quatrième defensive tackle et sixième tour, edge, pass rusher et tight end. Voilà, rions ensemble quand je me suis planté. On essaie de se retrouver après la draft. J'espère que ce premier épisode, un petit peu plus long que prévu, vous a plu. En tout cas, moi, je me suis éclaté à le faire. Une dernière fois, un très grand merci à Brooke Pryor. J'espère que vous avez aussi apprécié de pouvoir écouter ce qu'elle avait à dire. Et puis, je vous remercie tous de m'avoir écouté, moi aussi. Bonne draft à tous et here we go!